Skeletal fingers clasped the cracked armrests, jaw askew in an eternal scream. Admiral Ross stared at his slayer through vacant sockets. Archaeologist Jackson swiveled his single eye from the dead human to his team. Zaxor, Kryvex, Thylon, Myvox, Kadros, spread out. Find that data core. His 4 arms unfurled scanners and tools. The secrets this fleet took to its grave will rewrite galactic history. 1,000 wrecked ships littered planet Zeta 9. Rusting hulks jutted from dunes. Unburied bones crunched underfoot. Scorched metal hinted at the fleet's violent end. And at the heart of it all, the 2-kilometer flagship Resolute, now a silent crypt. Jackson interfaced with the deteriorated databanks. Damaged files zipped across cracked screens. Then a hollow recording flickered to life, a human in a bloodied uniform. Admiral Ross. Their Zorgon warships hit our frontier colonies. Static hissed, assembling every ship to strike back, outmatched, but the projection faltered. Earth depends on us. Stop them here, or they'll... It sputtered out. Jackson's cyclopean gaze flickered rapidly across the cracked screens as he pored through the data core's contents. Log entries from Admiral Ross himself began to paint a picture of the fateful battle that led to the Fifth Fleet's destruction on Zeta 9. The archaeologist's breath caught in his throat as he read the first entry. New Eden colony under attack, the Admiral's voice crackled through the ancient speakers. Zorgon's reptilian monsters 10 feet tall, hive mind, slaughtering civilians, thousands dead. Jackson cursed under his breath. He had heard tales of the Zorgon's brutality, but to witness it firsthand through these logs sent a chill down his spine. The next entry detailed the Fifth Fleet's engagement with the Zorgon warships. We're outmatched, Admiral Ross said, his voice strained. Their tech, too advanced. Losing ships, good people dying. But as Jackson continued to listen, the Admiral's tone shifted. We're adapting, learning their weaknesses. My crew, brave as hell. We'll turn this around. And turn it around they did. Admiral Ross's tactical genius began to shine through in the logs. He described daring maneuvers, clever feints, and bold strikes that slowly chipped away at the Zorgon fleet's defenses. Then came the most audacious move of all. Boarding the dreadnought, the Admiral said, his voice steely with resolve. Going after the Queen. Cut off the head, the body will fall. Jackson held his breath as he listened to the boarding party's progress. Admiral Ross, Captain Avery, and a squad of Marines fought their way through the Zorgon flagship, their weapons blazing, their battle cries echoing through the corridors. But the cost was high. Marines fell one by one, their lives snuffed out by the relentless Zorgon defenders. Captain Avery took a grievous wound, his pained groans filling the audio logs. And then, the final confrontation. Admiral Ross alone stood before the Zorgon Queen. The battle was fierce, the outcome uncertain. But in the end, the Admiral triumphed, his weapon finding its mark, the Queen's death cry ringing out across the ship. The Zorgon fleet fell into disarray, their hive mind shattered. The Fifth Fleet seized the advantage, unleashing a devastating barrage that tore through the enemy ranks. Zorgon ships exploded into fireballs, their debris raining down upon the sands of Zeta 9. But as Jackson listened to the final log, his heart grew heavy. Victory, but at what cost? Admiral Ross's voice was weary, broken. Half the fleet, gone, tens of thousands, dead. Was it worth it? I don't know any more. The log ended abruptly, leaving Jackson in silence. He stared at the flickering screens, his mind reeling from the revelations. But as Jackson dug deeper into the data core, he realized that the Battle of Zeta 9 was only the beginning of the conflict between humans and Zorgons. The logs revealed that the Zorgons, enraged by the death of their queen, had launched a massive counterattack on human colonies, targeting not only military installations, but also civilian populations. Entire cities were razed to the ground, their inhabitants slaughtered without mercy. Admiral Ross, despite the heavy losses suffered by his fleet, rallied the remaining ships and led a daring offensive deep into Zorgon territory. The logs detailed a series of hit-and-run attacks on Zorgon supply lines, and key military installations, with the human fleet using guerrilla tactics to strike at the heart of the Zorgon Empire. "We hit them hard and fast," Admiral Ross's voice crackled through the speakers, "disrupting their supply chains, destroying their factories, anything to weaken their war machine." But the Zorgons were not easily defeated. They adapted to the human tactics, setting traps and ambushes for the raiding parties. During one such raid, the UTSS Resolute, Admiral Ross's flagship, was caught in a Zorgon trap. They came out of nowhere. The Admiral's voice was strained, the sound of explosions and alarms blaring in the background. "Dozens of ships surrounding us on all sides. We're taking heavy damage, shields failing, engines offline." The Resolute was left heavily damaged and stranded deep behind enemy lines, with no hope of rescue. Admiral Ross, faced with an impossible choice, gave the order to abandon ship. "All hands, this is the Admiral." His voice was calm, resigned. "Proceed to the escape pods. I repeat, proceed to the escape pods. There's a habitable planet nearby. You should be safe there." But Admiral Ross himself refused to leave. Along with a small group of volunteers, he remained on board the Resolute, drawing the Zorgons away from the escape pods. "Someone has to stay behind. Give the others a chance to escape," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "It's been an honor serving with you all. Remember, humanity's survival depends on you now." The final log entry was short, a mere whisper amidst the chaos of the failing ship. "This is Admiral Nathaniel Ross, commanding officer of the UTSS Resolute. If anyone finds this, know that we fought to the end. We did our duty. Protect Earth, protect our people. Don't let our sacrifices be in vain." Jackson leaned back in his chair, his single eye flickering with emotion. The Admiral's words had struck a chord within him, a testament to the bravery and selflessness of these long-dead humans. He knew then that his mission had changed. It was no longer about uncovering history, but about honoring the sacrifices of those who had given everything to protect their species. He had to find out what happened to the Resolute and the brave souls who had stayed behind. He owed them that much. Jackson turned to his team, his voice filled with determination. "Change of plans. We're not just here for the data anymore. We're here to find the Resolute." Jackson turned to his team, his single eye narrowed in focus. "We're not leaving until we find out what happened to the Resolute and Admiral Ross. Search every inch of this graveyard. Look for clues, anything that can tell us how this battle ended." The archaeologists fanned out across the wreckage, scanners and tools at the ready. They sifted through twisted metal and shattered hull fragments, piecing together the story of the Resolute's final stand. Zaxa called out, his voice echoing across the desolate landscape. "Jackson, over here, I've found something." Jackson rushed over, his cybernetic eyes zooming in on the object in Zaxa's hands. It was a damaged data recorder, its casing scorched and dented. "Let's see what secrets you hold," Jackson muttered, connecting the recorder to his datapad. The device flickered to life, and a holographic projection of the Resolute's final moments played out before their eyes. The once mighty ship was a battered husk, its hull breached in a dozen places. Zorgon warships swarmed around it, their weapons tearing through the Resolute's failing shields. But the human vessel fought back with everything it had, its cannons blazing defiantly. Suddenly a blinding flash erupted from the Resolute's warp core. The ship seemed to fold in on itself, the fabric of space-time warping and twisting around it. In an instant, a massive singularity formed, its gravitational pull irresistible. Zorgon ships were caught in the maelstrom, their hulls crumpling like tin cans as they were dragged into the event horizon. The Resolute, too, was consumed, vanishing into the heart of the singularity. "My God," Mivox whispered, his eyes wide with shock. "He sacrificed his own ship to take out the Zorgons." Jackson nodded grimly. "But what about the escape pods? Did any of the crew survive?" Kryvex pointed to a cluster of debris nearby. "Over there, those look like escape pod fragments." The team rushed over, their scanners probing the wreckage. Thylan's voice crackled over the comms. "I'm detecting human biosigns. Faint, but definitely there." Jackson's heart raced. Survivors after all this time? They followed the biosigns, trekking across the barren landscape for weeks. The signals grew stronger with each passing day, leading them to a remote canyon on the far side of the planet. As they crested a ridge, they saw it, a makeshift settlement, cobbled together from the remains of escape pods and scavenged ship parts. Human figures moved among the ramshackle structures, their faces weathered and worn. Jackson and his team approached cautiously, their hands raised in a gesture of peace. An elderly man stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he took in the archaeologist's alien features. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice raspy with age. "What do you want?" Jackson bowed his head respectfully. "I am Jackson, an archaeologist. We mean you no harm. We're here to learn about the battle that took place here, and the fate of the Resolute." The old man's eyes widened. "The Resolute? You know of her?" Jackson nodded. "We found her wreckage and the logs of her crew, but we don't know the whole story. Can you tell us what happened?" The man sighed, his shoulders sagging. "I am Dr. Isaac Sorensen. I was a science officer aboard the Resolute during that fateful battle. I saw it all, from the moment the Zorgans ambushed us to the end." He led them into the settlement, to a small hut filled with salvaged equipment. On a battered desk sat a datapad, its screen cracked but still functional. Dr. Sorensen picked it up, his hands trembling. "Admiral Ross gave me this just before he ordered us to abandon ship. He said it contained a message for anyone who might find us." He tapped the screen, and a holographic image of Admiral Ross appeared. The man looked haggard, his uniform torn and bloodied, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. "This is Admiral Nathaniel Ross of the UTSS Resolute. If you're seeing this, then I'm likely dead, and the Resolute is lost. But I want you to know that we did not go quietly into the night. We fought to the end, to give our people a chance to escape and survive." The Admiral's voice was steady but tinged with emotion. "I ordered my crew to abandon ship, to seek refuge on this planet. But I could not leave. The Resolute's warp drive was damaged in the battle, and I knew that if I didn't stay behind to keep it stable, the singularity would collapse and the Zorgans would escape." He paused, his eyes distant. "I don't know if I succeeded. I don't know if the Zorgans were destroyed or if they'll come back to finish what they started. But I do know this. My crew, the brave men and women who served under my command, they are the best of humanity. They sacrificed everything to protect our people, and I could not be more proud of them." The Admiral's image flickered, static washing over his face. "To whoever finds this message, I ask only one thing. Remember us. Remember the Resolute and the heroes who gave their lives to defend Earth. Don't let our sacrifices be in vain. Carry on the fight, and never give up hope. Humanity's survival depends on it." With those final words, the message ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Dr. Sorensen bowed his head, tears glistening in his eyes. "We tried to carry on his legacy, to rebuild and survive. But it's been so long and we've lost so many. I fear that soon there will be nothing left of us, and the Admiral's sacrifice will be forgotten." Jackson placed a hand on the old man's shoulder, his voice firm with conviction. "No, we won't let that happen. We'll make sure that the galaxy knows of the Resolute and of the heroes who fought and died here. Your story, and the Admiral's, will live on." Dr. Sorensen looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Thank you, Jackson. Thank you for finding us and for giving our struggle meaning." Jackson nodded, his mind already racing with plans. They would need to excavate the wreckage further, to gather every scrap of data and evidence they could find. They would need to interview the survivors, to record their stories and experiences, and then they would need to share this knowledge with the galaxy to ensure that the sacrifices of Admiral Ross and his crew were never forgotten. As they left the settlement, Jackson looked up at the stars, his heart heavy with the weight of history. The Battle of Zeta 9 may have been lost to time, but now, thanks to their efforts, it would be remembered. The Resolute and the brave souls who had given their lives to defend humanity would live on in memory and legend. And somehow Jackson knew that wherever he was, Admiral Ross was looking down on them, a proud smile on his face. Jackson stood on the bridge of his ship, his gaze fixed on the holographic display before him. The faces of Dr. Sorensen and the other survivors, weathered by years of hardship, looked back at him with a mix of hope and determination. "We cannot abandon them," Dr. Sorensen said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Admiral Ross gave his life so that we could live. We owe it to him, to all those who sacrificed, to stand and fight." Jackson hesitated, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. To go against the wishes of his superiors, to risk everything he had worked for. But then he remembered the Admiral's words, the unyielding resolve in his voice, even in the face of certain death. "Very well," Jackson said at last. "We will answer the call, we will fight." The survivors, their faces lighting up with gratitude, immediately set to work, preparing their makeshift fleet for battle. Jackson watched them, marveling at their courage, their willingness to put their lives on the line for a colony they had never met. As they approached the besieged colony, the scale of the Zorgon attack became clear. Dozens of warships, their hulls gleaming with malevolent intent, swarmed around the planet, raining fire on the defenseless settlements below. Jackson's ship, the Iconus, shuddered as a barrage of plasma bolts slammed into its shields. On the viewscreen, Zorgon fighters streaked past, their weapons flaring. "Shields at 60%, Mivox shouted over the blaring alarms. "We can't take much more of this." Jackson gripped the armrests of his chair, his mind racing. They were hopelessly outnumbered, outgunned. But then, unbidden, the image of Admiral Ross's final stand flashed before his eyes. The way he had used the Resolute's warp drive to create a singularity, turning a certain defeat into a fighting chance. "The star," Jackson whispered, realization dawning. "Mivox, plot a course for the system's star. Krivex, divert all power to engines and shields." His crew, though puzzled, obeyed without question. The Iconus surged forward, weaving through the chaos of battle, the battered human ships falling into formation behind it. As they neared the seething ball of nuclear fire, Jackson turned to Dr. Sorensen. "I need your people to keep the Zorgons busy. Draw them away from the colony." Dr. Sorensen nodded grimly. "We'll give them a fight they won't soon forget." The human ships peeled away, engaging the Zorgon fleet with a ferocity that belied their small numbers. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the void, ships exploding into fireballs on both sides. Jackson watched the battle unfold, his heart heavy. So many lives lost, so much sacrifice, but there was no time for grief, not yet. "Mivox, prepare to vent our drive plasma," Jackson ordered. "On my mark, dump it directly into the star's corona." Mivox's eyes widened in understanding. "The resulting flare, it will disrupt their formation." Jackson nodded. "And give the colony a chance to evacuate." He turned to Krivex. "Send a message to the colony. Tell them to get their people to the ships, now." The Iconus shuddered as it skimmed the surface of the star, its shields glowing white-hot. Jackson gripped the armrests tighter, feeling the heat even through the ship's protective fields. "Now, Mivox," he shouted, "vent the plasma." A stream of superheated gas erupted from the Iconus's drive, plunging into the star's roiling surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a blinding flash, a massive solar flare erupted from the star, engulfing the nearby Zorgon ships. Their formation shattered. The Zorgons fell into disarray. Some ships, caught directly in the flare, simply vaporized. Others, their systems overloaded, drifted helplessly. But the victory was short-lived. As the flare dissipated, the remaining Zorgon ships regrouped, turning their weapons on the Iconus and its human allies with renewed fury. Jackson watched in horror as Dr. Sorensen's ship, the Resolute's Legacy, took a direct hit. The vessel exploded, fragments of metal and debris scattering across the void. "Dr. Sorensen!" Jackson cried out, but there was no response. The brave human, the last living link to Admiral Ross and the Resolute, was gone. The Iconus shook violently as the Zorgon barrage intensified. Consoles exploded, sending sparks flying. Kryvek slumped over his station, a shard of metal protruding from his chest. "Shields are down," Mivok shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms. "Hull breach on decks 4 through 7. Jackson closed his eyes, bracing himself for the end. But then a voice crackled over the comm. "Iconian vessel, this is the colony administrator. Our people are safely aboard the evacuation ships. We are clear of the planet." Jackson let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. They had done it. The colony was safe. But the battle was not without cost. As the Iconus limped away from the carnage, Jackson surveyed the damage. Half his crew dead, the ship barely holding together. And then, the final blow. "Incoming message from Iconia," Mivok said, his voice hollow. "Jackson, they've branded you a traitor. For disobeying orders, for aiding the humans. They're ordering your immediate arrest." Jackson leaned back in his chair, numb. He had known the risks, the consequences of his actions, but faced with the choice, he knew he would do it all again. He looked out at the stars, at the distant glimmer of the human evacuation ships. They would need help, support, if they were to survive, and he would be there, to honor the sacrifices of Admiral Ross, Dr. Sorensen, and all those who had given their lives in the name of a greater cause. "Set a course for the evacuation fleet," Jackson said, his voice steady. "We have work to do." As the Iconus turned away from Iconia, away from everything Jackson had ever known, he felt a strange sense of peace. He was a traitor to his own people, but in the eyes of the humans, he was something else. A friend, an ally, a hero. And as he looked out at the stars, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them. For the memory of Admiral Ross, for the brave souls of the Resolute, for the future of humanity. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.